Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Endless Celts Podcast. I'm Ross, and I'm going to be taking the reins tonight. So tonight we're going to be delving into seasons past and one of our spin-off shows, the Celtic Rewind. So, as a wise man, the chief once said, "Don't look back in anger," and we certainly won't tonight as we cover our famous Centenary 87-88 double winning season. So I've enlisted the services of Mr. David Goldie tonight. He's not a regular on the podcast, evidently, and he'll be navigating us through this. As although I'm a little bolder, he's a little older. So how are you getting on, David?
I'm well, Ross, mate. I'm well, really well. Thanks very much. And obviously, slightly less follically challenged than yourself, but that's not anything to sniffed at. But yeah, thanks for inviting me on. I'm, as I say, not a contributor, but certainly been a listener, been enjoying the show. It's been great listening to the show as it progressed over the last few months. It's really picking up and doing a great job. So appreciate the invite on.
Aye, no, thanks for the support on that as well, Dave. And I couldn't have thought many better guys to sort of navigate us through this one. I've heard you talking about this, well, mentioning this season as one of your favourites in the past. So, I mean, we'll just get right into it. So, I mean, first of all, to kick us off, just sort of let us know how your relationship, your sort of love affair started with the great club that is Celtic.
Well, I suppose my born into what you'd all call a Celtic supporting family, both sides. But I suppose the intro to Celtic for me wasn't actually my dad. In most cases, it's your dad that takes you. But in my case, it was my Uncle Joe. Whom Uncle Joe was my mum's big brother, and he was what you would a Celtic daft, an utter lunatic for Celtic. And he had a lot of health challenges in his time, but he used to go home and away for years and years. And I used to remember him when I was a young kid coming back always with a few sherbets in him after the football on a Saturday, and hearing all about Celtic on the Saturday night when he's had a few beers. And actually, funnily enough, I say my dad, my first venture to football, I think I went with my dad and my mum to a friendly. And then we went to a couple of games in the 86-87 season. My dad and I, both Celtic Hibs. And my dad had this pretense at the time that he really hated all the bigotry associated with the whole firm thing at the time. And he used to almost kid on he was a Hibs fan. And he took us to Easter Road a number of times, actually, and sat in the Celtic end Easter Road for Celtic Hibs and vice versa back at Celtic Park. So my first games at Celtic Park were with my dad to go and see us play Hibs. And that would be probably 86-87 season. And then again, the next season, we lost the league to Rangers the year after. And soonest that came in. So that's like my first real intro to Celtic. Obviously, over the years, watching, listening, and growing up in Celtic. But by that time, you're getting to primary 5 and 6. You're playing football every day. All you did at the time, there was nothing else to do bar football, was there? So it was a constant Celtic in the background, and so that's where it kind of kicked off from. And I suppose the first real season I can remember in earnest really was the year we nicked it off Hearts in '86, and that year was probably when I suppose started falling in love with football in a way. It's that what became something you did every day, and you were avidly listening and watching and trying to understand what was happening. So that's where it kind of kicked off, and I'd been maybe primary 5, I think, at the time. And by the time we got to the year we're going to discuss, I was almost heading off to the big schools, they call it the St. Kent's. But we were primary 7, and it was a massive year for us in terms of the Centenary. And the year before, obviously, they'd thrown everything at it with soonest coming in and starting to spend money like they have over the last 20 years, spend money they didn't have to bring players in to kind of outdo us. So yeah, that's where it all kicked off from. Uncle Joe, definitely, God rest his soul. He passed away right back in '96. He was down for the Scotland-England game, Euro '96, and he never made it back. So he was my earliest memories of Celtic. And you mentioned there's no many better people to speak to about this year. I can think of a good few, but maybe not would talk as much rubbish as me. But like big Andy Greenhorn or wee Bobby Lee or that, they'd remember every pass, every tackle of the whole season. They were every game home and away.
Aye. I don't think we'll need to worry about awkward silences with yourself, Dave. That's the main thing.
That's never been one for that, mate. Never one for that.
No, absolutely no. But I mean, so just going into the season, just to get started, sort of the summer beforehand. I mean, I was probably, what age would I have been about when this? I'd been about 5 or 6. So my memories are basically nil with this season. So I've had to do a bit of research to sort of help with the line of questioning and let you navigate us through. But I mean, to start off the summer beforehand, we were losing a lot of big name players. By all accounts, Alan McInally and Brian McClare had went down south. Mo Johnston and Murdo MacLeod, they'd went to the continent, whilst McGrain, Latchford and Proven also left for various reasons. But I mean, just sort of with that summer leading up to that, do you have much memories of those guys leaving? And would you say that summer sort of has some parallels with the summer we've sort of just experienced and just there the now?
Absolutely. You just took the words out of my mouth. I was just going to say it was almost a bit like a bit like 2 seasons it reminded me. Was this the season we're coming into in the O'Neill season in terms of 2001? Because we had you're not talking just about a few players going, and back then you're talking about losing pretty much the spine of your team there. You know, we lost, I think we lost, as you mentioned, a few of them, right? So we've lost, obviously, Mojo had went, and McLeod had went, and even, like, say, Big Rambo and Brian McClare. I mean, the whole Brian McClare thing, that for me, it gets vastly underrated, but Chalky McClare was an absolutely fantastic football player. And actually, if you look at how well he done at United, he kind of skated under the radar a bit, but they robbed us for him at that tribunal. It was hundreds of thousands of pounds, well below the kind of what it would have cost if it went in the market as it should have. But we lost, as you say, 7 or 8 first teamers. You know, it was like a proper clear out. And again, it reminds me, like I said, the O'Neill season, and almost like the season we've just had, where you're losing, almost a dozen players in some cases. And actually, the reality is, the ones that went, it wasn't deadwood you were shipping out. It was guys who were contributing every week the year before. And even the season before that, when we won it at Love Street, these guys were all, playing every game. So, and like, obviously, like being sentimental about it, you're losing, like, say, Danny McGrain. Danny was coming to end his career, but Danny was still as fit as a fiddle then. He still was. Danny McGrain looked fit at 60. He was still playing the 5-a-side tank with Celtic training when he was about 60. So he was still. He probably still the best right back in Scotland now, to be fair. But
he was top class, wasn't
he? Different gravy. And again, lucky enough to have seen him in the flesh a good few times. But at the end of his career, but I'd love to see him in his prime. I mean, one of the guys who just was dynamite. But it was huge clear out, and in a lot of cases didn't generate the kind of funds it would have done in today's market. It's a bit like when Edward was getting talked about 2-3 years ago at 35 million, 40 million. Actually, the reality is we've done really well to get the money we did for him this year with the year left in his contract. So it kind of put us in a better position, because at the same time as you're losing all these players across the city, they've got an open checkbook of somebody else's money, and they're just going for it, just spending cash everywhere, and bringing in, because of the whole Heysel thing, they were blessed enough to be able to have the wages available, and also the opportunity of potentially having European football for some of these guys that probably never came up to Scotland. Like they had the England captain, they had the England goalkeeper, and multiple players coming for the England team who would never have looked at Celtic or Rangers at that time. But the fact is that because the way the English game was banned out of Europe for a number of years, that opened the door for them. So it was a poor summer, and actually coming into a huge year for Celtic in '88 in the Centenary, really, I think a lot of fans were a bit worried about what was going to happen.
Aye. Well, I mean, especially when you say the amount of players we lost, and I was going to actually ask that ban coincided with all the players coming to Rangers, all the English guys, eh?
Exactly, that's it. And it gave them a wee. I mean, the year before, actually, when they won it, I think a lot of fans. In fact, I know we'll probably come back to it. A lot of fans would have thought they're in for a number of titles in a row there, and actually they went on to do that, obviously. But I think I don't think there's a great deal of hope getting into that 87-88 season that Celtic could go and win the league. I think a lot of fans were look at the players they lost and players they were bringing in, we're a wee bit worried, to say the least, I think.
Aye. And then, I mean, obviously, of course, you have to touch on that they got Billy McNeil back in just in that summer as well, for a second spell as manager. I mean, from memory, would you say that reappointment had a big bearing in what lay ahead for us that season?
Huge, absolutely huge, because if you think, you cast your mind back to, when Billy came in, he'd been away and came back already to Celtic. And it's one of those things, a lot of times you think about a coach or a manager coming back to the club again, and it's happened with, like, say, Mourinho going back to Chelsea, things like that. It doesn't often work out. But with Big Billy, just because he was steeped in Celtic, even Mr. Celtic, wasn't he? Like, you kind of felt when he came in, it would re-galvanise the players that were there. And as long as he had the ability to bring a few in, and he did that, he was actually lucky. He made some really shrewd buys at the start of that season. That made a massive difference. But also just being the character he was, and being, as I say, Mr. Celtic, McNeil coming. But I don't think for a minute, if Celtic went out to the market and brought in another coach for that season, that would have had the year we did. It was a special year because of the year and what it meant to everybody at Celtic, and McNeil knew that better than anybody.
Aye, it was just kind of it was written in the stars, eh?
But it's spot on, exactly that. It's just those things that if you brought somebody else in who didn't know what it was about to try and do it in that season, I don't think it would have happened. I mean, I'm not talking for experience, but what I've read up on, I would tend to sort of agree with that. But you touched on how he bought some shrewd buys when he came in. I mean, by all accounts, he didn't have a massive transfer budget. Certainly no the budget that maybe some Celtic managers are allowed now. But he's when you compare it to Souness as well and what they were spending, as you touched on, you would have to say he probably used it well, bringing in guys like Andy Walker and Billy Stark. Who else? Chris Morris, I think they add to that. And I think Mick McCarthy had been signed by Davy Hay before McNeil's arrival. He came in just before that McNeil came back, but the spot on. I think it's one of them. I don't think much Andy Walker now at all. He's taker, but he's at the time, he scored plenty of goals, and he actually, he got off to a great start at Celtic, and he had a really good year that year in particular. But for me, the pick of the bunch of the guys, and it's flying under the radar now in terms of how people look back at it and probably think about how good a player he actually was. And it was later in his career, but Billy Stark was a huge signing for Celtic at the time. He was already a battle-hardened quality player and had been in a right good team, and so he knew what it was about. And actually, Stark coming in was he probably wasn't one of the signings that was like he wouldn't be getting paraded now in the middle of the centre circle with hundreds of fans around about him, but he made a big difference to that side. And actually Chris Morris, he had the season of his life in the Centenary, but he was actually an underrated player. Chris Morris, he was a decent right back, to be fair to him.
Aye, I mean, I've only got like vague memories of him when he was still playing at Celtic when my Uncle Gary started taking me to the football, taking me to the games and putting me in the old jungle and that. But I've no loads of memories of him. But I mean, so going into the opener against Morton, it was the feeling there that this team, well, I mean, you've sort of touched on it anyway, that maybe beforehand you maybe weren't really feeling that they could challenge Rangers, but it was it sort of ramped up that it was more positive after the opening result against Morton?
I think that's one of the classic things. If you look at this season, right, we lost the opening game at Tynecastle, but everybody came out of that game actually feeling a lot more positive than I had felt 2 or 3 weeks before, right? Because you could see there was some form or semblance of a style of play, and actually, bossed the entire game and lost a daft goal against Hearts, right? But that season, the opposite happened. We got off to a flyer. I think we won 4 or 5-0 in the first game.
4-0. I've got.
We hammered Morton in the first game, and actually, if I'm trying to remember back today, but we Walker got a brace. I think he got 1 or 2 anyway. And And that get him off for any it's like any striker goes to a new club, and particularly if they go to a team like Celtic, where you need to be scoring 25-30 goals a year if you're Celtic one of the main strikers of Celtic. And at that time, obviously, you're playing two up front, so it's not like you're the only forward. He got off to a flyer, and he scored a good few goals early in the season. So that probably made for the move. It was Motherwell came for, I think. So coming from Motherwell to Celtic to hit the ground running like that probably made a big difference to him, and therefore the team for getting off to a decent start. But certainly after the opening game, and especially because Rangers had a bit of a shaky start that year. They didn't start particularly well, and hadn't bedded in very well. And it looked, if you looked at the first half dozen games, or even first 4 or 5 games, probably Celtic were, out in front by a good bit against them. But yeah, it was one of the ones where you're thinking maybe, in the Neil factor, you get the McNeil factor, he's in. They've not had a great start, and you start to obviously, it's like you win one game 4-0, and everybody goes away believing that they're going to win the league. You know what I mean? So it was definitely. It just changed overnight. You're like, this is going to be a shaky season, and then you go off and you win 4-0, and it's like everybody comes out of the game thinking, right, we're going to do this year. After one game, that's just typical Celtic fans.
It's a bit like the Dundee game there. You come off the back of the defeat at Tynecastle, and then you go and beat Dundee 6-0, and everybody thinks that's the league's going to be wrapped up.
You've got top football after that, and handball, and it's. To be fair, that game it was 6 going on 12 or 14. It could have been any score that day, but it's like anything else. You've got to temper that enthusiasm and hope for a wee bit. But I think certainly after the opening game, people were a wee bit more confident about how we could do that year.
Mm-hmm. Aye, and I think Andy Walker actually, well, according to my notes and what I've read up on, again I touch on that I've no memory of this season really, but I think he got off to two doubles in the first 2 games. I mean, that's what you want for your striker, like you say. You want it's like Kyogo, you know what I mean? Again, it's parallels with this season. So to an extent, you get off to a flyer in your first couple of games. It's what you want as a striker.
That's it. And you look at this season, and you're buying a wee guy who's weighs 5 stone for Japan, and all this rubbish folk are talking about, who know nothing about Japanese football and how good the lad is, and he comes in and his movements it's frightening, to be honest with you. How good I actually can't wait to get back to a game and see him in the flesh, because I think his movement just looks incredible. And the difference he makes when he plays through the middle is just night and day. Andy Walker wasn't that kind of runner, but certainly getting somebody who can get off to a decent start. And I think man's got, was that 6 he's got now or something already. So you look at that, and it was definitely parallels with this season. You go, he's got off to a decent start. I remember Big Hartson came up, and I think he went some stupid like 12 games or so, 13 games without scoring. And that's a guy who's came up for 6 million for the Premier League and has banged in 100 goals down there, and you thought he was guaranteed goals, and it still got to him. It took him a dozen games or so to get off the mark. So for Walker to get, I think you're probably spot on. He scored a good few early on, so that made a big difference to how he would perceive. I suppose how he'd be perceived, because it's a big move for any kind of provincial clubs up to Celtic, and you've got to hit the ground running. So that definitely helped, and I think with him not having a great start as well, it probably settled us down a wee bit, and let us let us find a way of playing, and let Big Billy's kind of his approach bed in with some of the new players they brought in as well, because we had a clear out. It wasn't a continuity there. It was a lot of new players coming in, and a lot of guys getting promoted and stuff as well.
Mm-hmm. And you've just touched on how they had a poor start. I think, according to my notes, they failed to win any of their first 3 games.
Mm-hmm.
So that going into game 5 against them, for us, it was the opening Old Firm at Parkhead. Just sort of talk us through some of that game, if you've much memory of it.
Well, it's funny because I mentioned that in terms of the games against it, everybody always talks about how the games against them are always the ones that define the season. And actually, if you look at it that season, I don't think we lost a game to them that year in the league. I think we won them all. Right? I think we beat them. Oh, we didn't beat. We drew a game as well at their place, but I don't think we lost to them in the league, right? So it isn't always that way. But for me, it was one of the games you were in that game off them, and they did a really poor start, as I say, compared to us. I think we maybe dropped points in the fourth game of a draw or something, but certainly getting into that game, it was like, right, we've got a wee bit of lead over them, and we're at home. And I think they're probably a bit more fancied than they would have been, if it had been the first or second game of the season, they wouldn't have been fancied to win the game, Celtic. But what I remember about that game is I wasn't at it. I got to one of the derbies that season. That wasn't it. But I remember that game. Obviously, at the time you're getting 15-page pullouts in the paper the next day and watching the extended highlights and all that, and speaking to Uncle Joe and hearing he was at the game and hearing every bit of analysis of who played well. But what I remember the build up to it was McStay looked like he was going to be out, and that was, I can remember running into the game all week in the papers. It was about how the Maestro was going to miss the game, and that was Celtic beat basically if he was out. But that game, and actually a couple of games that season boiled over. But what I remember about it was, well, first of all, right at the end of the game, and you look at the guy, he's just a scumbag anyway. But Graham Roberts, who came up for, I think maybe for Spurs, they came up for, one of their England players. He kicked off at the final whistle. I remember that. We obviously beat them, and he's kicked off at the final whistle and causing a ruckus and that, a bit like Diouf did. Remember Diouf did, and when Bruni done away, kicking off and throwing his shirt off and all that carry on. He done a bit of that, but I remember Souness got sent off in the game. And to be fair, Souness could have sent off in every game, right? He got away with absolute murder up here. Souness at Liverpool was a world class player. Souness at Rangers was nowhere near the player he was down there, and he got away with blue murder. I say, pardon the pun with blue, but he ran about, he kicked everything that moved. He was a total thug up here and got away with every game. You could have counted 3 or 4 instances in a game where he should have been booked or sent off, and they get away with one booking every 4 matches or something. He was a total animal up here, but he got sent off. But I remember that the best bit about it was that we scored a brilliant goal. Like, in terms of the watching it, having known you won the game, so it's like you've not seen the game yet. You're watching the highlights on Sports Scene. I think it was probably Scott Sport at the time. You're watching that, but you know who scored the goal, and you know who's bulked the goal up because they've read all the reports in the papers next and Sunday morning, eh? And I can remember reading about it was great build-up play and all that for the team. I feel like, and obviously Big Mark McGee was there. I'm sure it was like TB, Tommy Burns was involved. Like, it was a great bit of football, and eventually Billy Stark scored a really good goal against them. And after that, it was, to be fair, Celtic were a better team. And to say, Souness made a shocking challenge on Billy Stark. Probably these days they'd have a 6-game ban for it. It was that bad. And it's one of the ones, right? I can remember it. I haven't watched it the next morning or next day. Whatever. I think, to be fair, Celtic were the better side, but a good way. Rangers didn't really trouble us in that game. I mean, that's obviously at home. They weren't playing well, and by the time we finished that game, you built up a decent lead against them. And I think because we managed to score, like Stark scored early on, it was like 10 minutes or something. He scored dead early in the game, first 10 minutes, and they had a good side too. It wasn't like they were missing players. They had pretty much a full team out against us. It wasn't like when suddenly into the game with missing 5 or 6 first teamers. They had your Durants, the Fergusons, they had Souness, all the guys that were their kind of first team picks, Davy Coopers and McCoist and all that. They were all on the team, and Celtic definitely bossed the game. And actually, typically, it was all like you look at it now. They got away with some horrendous tackles during the game, being thuggish. We won 1-0 though, but I think the difference is that a lot of Celtic teams, apart from Martin O'Neill's team, loads of Celtic teams in my lifetime have been lightweight in terms of not want to kick back, right? But it's that Celtic team had some boys who could kick back, right? You had, obviously you've got guys in midfield like McStay and Peter Grant. They didn't. Paul McStay doesn't get viewed as it. Paul McStay was hard as nails when he was younger. He was a proper tackler. But you had TV, you had Peter Grant, you had McStay in midfield, and you had like Big Roy Aitken and that in the team, and guys that could look after themselves and their teammates. So when they were throwing these tackles about, we weren't shy. Do you know what I mean? It was a proper battle. But Celtic were by far the best team, and it was one of the ones you came out of it going, you've won that. You didn't breathe for 90 minutes or basically if you're at the game, but then you go, we've won. That's us beat them for the first time this year. So definitely, you mentioned that right at the start. That kind of, how was it? what was the kind of taking the temperature of the fans at the start of that season. By the time we beat them that game, everybody was thinking, right, this is on for us here, because they've started rubbish. And that was it, to be fair, with a wee lull after that. The team weren't great for a few weeks after that, but there was a wee period we went through, we couldn't buy a win. Draws, a bit like TV's team the year lost the league, too many draws. But we went through a great, a wee sticky spell, but definitely we all felt after that 1-0 game that it was there for the taking. They were there for the taking that year.
Aye. So I mean, obviously you've touched on that wee sticky spell. I was going to ask about that. Like, I think they went something like 3 wins for 9, but I mean, after that, like, I mean, after the Rangers game, I think they've opened up something like an 8-point lead, and then they go through that sticky spell. So as you say, that you really felt like they could go and win the league, and then the sticky spell happens. Do you think then, maybe we're getting a bit far ahead of ourselves here?
Aye, that's it. It was one of those classic Celtic thing. I can't remember all the exact results because it's gone back too long ago. But what I can remember is there was a period of time where I think we maybe played about 5 games, we drew 4 of them or something like that. And by the way, one thing about it at the time is that it's still 2 points for a win, right? So I think that was just before that. Maybe the couple of seasons after that changed to 3 points for a win, I think. So draws weren't the end of the world back then. Now it's like it's the classic kind of year with what's his name, Hugh Hines and Clyde one. He always goes on about how a draw is a catastrophe or something, defeats, whatever it is he goes on about it.
Aye.
It was the end of the world basically when you're a Celtic Rangers manager. But it was one of them, and all I remember is really, if you think back then, right, there was probably 5 or 6 teams in that first division, right, who were decent sides, not up there with Celtic's level. But if you remember back until when Rangers won the league in '87, they hadn't won the league in a decade plus. They weren't in the hunt. Aberdeen, United, Hearts, they were all right good teams. So it wasn't like, see, if you went to Tynecastle saying you drew 1 each, wasn't the end of the world. It was that sometimes was not a bad result. Up to Pittodrie then, if you could take something away Pittodrie, you were quite delighted with it, to be honest with you. So it wasn't like some of the games, I can't remember, there was a couple, I'm sure I think we got beat off Dunfermline or Morton or somebody like that early on in the season. I can't remember exactly who it was, but we lost a game we shouldn't lose to. But it's one of the ones you think, if Hearts beat us, you would have thought it's no end of the world. If Aberdeen beat us, Dundee United, who were a right good team at the time, if they beat us, it's no end of the world. But then that sticky spell, it was more about the draws. And I think, to be fair, it was like Walker went off the boil after his good start. We didn't have a lot of great options up front. You know what I mean? Like, I think Mark McGee was still there. Was McGee still there? Who was there? So, but you'd lost a lot of goals in the previous season. You know what I mean? You'd lost McClare, you'd lost Johnson, you lost some guy, you'd lost, obviously, your Bayern Munich legend in terms of Big McAnally, right? You'd lost some proper guys who could score goals. So that it wasn't a huge surprise, I don't think, that they went a number of games we drew on. I mean, it was one of the things you can expect. But it was certainly after the sticky start they had, and I was getting off to a flyer. It probably brought us all back down to earth a wee bit.
Aye. But then, I mean, you then come out of that sort of sticky period, if you like, and back then you didn't have the sort of restriction of transfer windows and stuff. And coming out the other side, we were able to bring in McAvenny and Joe Miller. In memory, do you think that tipped the balance for us again and buoyed the squad? Given I think we went on after it, we went on something like a 6-month unbeaten run. I think it was something like 26 games.
Made all the difference, Ross. And actually, the reality is now, if you look at it, like clubs like, if you go back before transfer windows were implemented, right? Clubs who, before huge TV money made all the difference, clubs who were big clubs because they had money, because they had big supports and had big commercial deals around that, so you had huge amount of fans, big fan base, that's where your money came from. They clubs always could buy players that made the difference, right? And that's your Liverpool's, United's down south, up at Arsenal's the world when they were a huge team. But up here, if Celtic were in trouble at the time, there was money to buy players, right? And actually they went out and Joe Miller done brilliantly coming by. Joe was underrated with Celtic. He was a good player before he came, he was a good player after he left Celtic. But But McAvenny was inspired, and I'll be honest, I know that if they hadn't got Frank McAvenny in, it wouldn't have been a double win in Centenary season. You know that by the goals he scored, but McAvenny, and it's actually quite sad. I think McAvenny went down and lit it up down there, like literally, like you know, you look at like the guys like, you know, Christie and that going down to England now, right? They're going down to Bournemouth of the world. You've got our main striker going down to Watford, right? McAvenny went to West Ham, and I think they finished second or third in the league, but there was a season where there was like a strike with the TV cameras and stuff, so Match of the Day wasn't on and all that kind of stuff. McAvenny was like either top scorer or second top scorer in the first division in England, right, with West Ham. And him and Tony Cottee like were bullying teams for fun. They were outstanding, the two of them. So when we signed him, that was like, how do you like now, I suppose? If like Celtic going down to a team that finished second or third in England and signing their best striker, right, midway through the season in the January window, say, you wouldn't do it now because the money would be too much. But at that time, the money wasn't that much a difference, so we could do it. And when like Frank came in, it was just made for Celtic. It was like, if you look at, we've had in your and my lifetime, we've had the benefit of seeing some, for sometimes too short a time, some outstanding strikers. Like go back to Cadettis of the world, obviously Henrik, but you've had some fabulous players, and more recently Dembele's and that. But McAvenny was up there anything as a goal scorer. Frank McAvenny, he was a fabulous striker. So that to me, the kind of Boyd, kind of, I suppose, after a lull, to go out and get these players in, it just gave the whole team a boost, and the fans a boost too, because we knew how good a player McAvenny was. Do you know what I mean? It was like it wasn't like he was playing out of Mongolia. He was playing down the road and banging goals in for fun. So he knew it was a good signing, and knew how good a player he was when he was up here before he went down there. So it probably, he's one of the guys Celtic should probably have signed before he went away for Scotland. But he was made for Celtic for me. He's a fabulous player.
Aye, I mean, I'm only going with some of the goals that we'll probably touch on in the semi-final and stuff like that. Just poacher's goals, just there in the right place. Just knew where the goals were. But,
that's it. He was fast as well. Like, I don't know if folk noticed how fast he was. He was quick over it, like not like Gareth Bale quick or somebody over 60 yards. But see 10, 15 yard runs, dynamite. He was just as you say, just knew he had that, the classic knack. He knew where to be, and he was brave as a lion as well. That's one thing about McAvenny. Like, you look at some strikers now, and they don't want to put their head in or their foot, where most people would put their feet. McAvenny would stick his head in anywhere. He was brave as anything. For the side, he's not. Remember, I don't know if you met Frank McAvenny before. Most folk have met him because he's out and about all the time much. But he's not a big guy. You know, I mean, I don't mean you and the big people, right? He is. He's like, I'm not particularly tall, so standing next to him, I was surprised how wee he was, considering the amount of amazing headers he scored, eh?
Aye, a bit like, well, not putting him in the same bracket, but Larson wasn't a big, massive guy either, and he was brilliant in there.
Great, but brave as well, eh? You should put his head in where it mattered, eh? You there?
There's a bit of a noise there.
Aye. Is it coming from my side? I'm quiet in this outside.
I don't know. It stopped now. It's fine. I don't know what that was.
I heard something. If Stephen said, I'm not sure, but if he's off mute, I don't know. Sorry, we can cut that. I don't know. So we're at,
that's fine. Carry on. I don't know where you were there. It was actually going on for a wee bit.
Aye, we got up to the bit about talking about how that made a big difference. I think next in your notes are about talking about the game at Hearts, the draw at Hearts.
Oh, aye. So after that we got we go to Hearts and we got a 2-2 draw. Like you've touched on, going to Tynecastle back then and places like that, a draw wasn't a bad result. And like, there's obviously a bigger gap nowadays than what there was then, but I still think you could go to Tynecastle or Pittodrie any time and draw at any time. And that's how I look at, like, and even lose. Like the two games we've lost this year, you could lose the games at any time in any season, so it's not a big deal. But they go there and they draw 2-2 during that run. It seemed to be a huge draw in the end, given that they were 2-0 down with 15 minutes to go. I realise you want to. I'm saying you go to Tynecastle. This game was actually at home, but I realise you want. It was
Aye, that was at home.
But you want to win your home games, but if that position, 2-0 down with 15 minutes to go, that's sort of salvaging that game and getting a knacky, not knowing when you're beating, eh?
Aye, absolutely. That it was one of the ones that it was two late goals that turned it around, and it's one of the games. It's a classic thing where it's just Celtic, where you're behind in a game late on, and you end up nicking something out of it. It's one of the ones that if you're at home, it's probably you get the first goal, and you know for a fact that with 10 minutes to go, if Celtic score a goal, they'll get 2 goals. I don't know why that happens in games. It's just like you can look at it, and it doesn't matter who you're playing against. You can say if we get 1, we'll get 2. You know what I mean? Just you feel it. And I remember about that one. That's one of the games I can remember Uncle Joe coming back because it had a right good scoop after it in the commercial, I think. And I remember talking to him about that game the Sunday and talking about how did you think we're beating, all that kind of stuff. It's just being dada fladdy, you know, what was the game like, kind of stuff. 2-0 down with so like late on, and I came in saying that it was one of the games where Celtic, I think Celtic deserved the draw, he said, but it was one of you didn't think it was coming until the first goal came, and then you just knew 100% you'd get that second goal. Do you know what I mean? It was like as soon as the first went in, it was like, right, well, the second goal will come. And I think the other thing too, going back to just no more than like 18 months before it, like Hearts, I think the reason Hearts fans hate Celtic fans is because of '86. You know, they really like. I've been to Ibrox dozens of times, and I've been to Tynecastle dozens of times, and by far the worst fans are Hearts fans for me in terms of the way they behave with Celtic fans, right? And I think it stems back to that. It goes back as long as that. It's like utter hatred because of the fact that they thought they won a title in '86 and we won it off them, right? So I think that's to do it. So the fact they bottled it that year, right, and threw it away, and we just kept winning at the end of the year with under Hay and then nicked it. I think that's the type of game where it's a bit like if you remember the game under Strachan, I think it was at New Year time. It must be New Year because I was hanging like washing the next day. We've been out, and it was like we're in the pub watching it, and we're 2-0 down against Hearts, and we turned it around and won 3-2. And Big McManus 2 goals late on, right? Mm-hmm. One of the games I was actually I was super hungover and like could hardly even celebrate, but I did. But it was one of the games. See, as soon as Celtic scored the first goal, you didn't even think we were going to just get a draw off Hearts. You felt we were going to beat them. Do you know what I mean? It was like we'll beat them because they'll bottle it. And it was like that game. Joe said as soon as Celtic scored the first goal, you knew they get a result. So that was massive because it's one of the games back then you lose that game at home. It's like an opportunity missed, especially when, as I said, they had started to pick up some points across the city by that point. So it wasn't like we didn't have a huge gap at that point. It wasn't like it was tons of time. So as I say, it might have been 10 or 15 minutes to go, and you've nicked a draw out of the game. So it was a fabulous result in the end. And the other kind of was winning the title if it goes close at the end of the season. It's getting that point when it really mattered. It made a big difference.
Aye, absolutely. I mean, that sort of result, 2 late goals, it's happened that often down the years that it's not a fluke. That's just Celtic to me. A lot of big teams are like that. Man United have been like that down the years. Even dare I say it, Rangers themselves. But so in that game, I'm sure it was McStay that gets the equaliser, and what a strike it was for the edge of the box. Again, I'm only going with YouTube. It looks a good strike to me, but it sort of brings me on to my next part. I mean, I remember McStay for sort of latter part of his career at Celtic. No all good memories, obviously, because we went through a barren spell after the 88 season. One of my biggest memories of McStay is I'm missing that penalty in the Coca-Cola Cup final. But just as I say, I remember him in the latter part of his career with Celtic. But could you sort of talk a little about him and describe him as a player, and also if you can, as I know him and as a lot of other guys on the podcast know him as the manager and coach, but Tommy Burns, the player, I'd love to hear a bit about him for your memory, and just I'm sure some of the younger listeners as well would love to hear about these two guys.
Aye, we could quite easily do a 2.5 or 3 hour podcast on Paul McStay alone, and probably right. TB, I seen Tommy Burns probably on his way down, but he was still a fabulous player. But for me, and it's like everybody's got their own heroes at Celtic, right? And you'll always, depending on what age you are, you'll have different, guys will always say to you, Larsson's the best player I've ever seen, right? But Henry Larsson was outstanding, no doubt about it. But there's guys who are Uncle Joe's age or Andy Greenhorn's age who'll say Ken Dalglish was the best player I've ever seen, right? Or Danny McGrain was the best player. They've got another generation. And Vardy's mum would say it'll be Bertie Auld or it'll be Bobby Murdoch, right? You go back generations, you'll always get different guys. I suppose in a way, I was lucky that I'm old enough to have seen Paul McStay in his prime, because not that by the time I started watching Celtic and going to games, Paul had already been butchered weekly, right? So you know how early he retired. He was a young man for retiring from football now, especially at a club at Celtic, where you'd expect they've got the best of medical care, the best of all stuff, type of stuff. And they did have, by the way, it was like world renowned how good they were at the time, Brian Scott and all sorts of stuff. But Paul McStay, when he broke through, I do talk about Paul McStay as being like this, as a kind of sitter, or like he's a midfielder that didn't run and all that, because that's what I remember watching him in his later years, right? But when McStay broke through as a kid, and bear in mind he was a kid, he was in the Celtic first team playing every week at 17 years old in the middle of the park. You see kids making it and breaking through when they're younger, when they play, like maybe McGeady broke into the team quite early, but he's playing out wide where he can kind of protect the player, or he'll find a fullback play, like Tierney breaks in because he's just too good to keep out the team, right? But to play in the middle of the park, and for Celtic at the time, and be a centre midfielder, in an era where you didn't get sitters and attacking midfielders, you didn't get lazy midfielders like Frank Lampard who just run forward, right? Or guys who just sit in and defend. Paul McStay obviously is a number 8. Paul covered every bit of grass in the park in his early years, and he genuinely was the first in the flesh, the first world-class player I've ever seen, right? Because there was other guys who were good players at Celtic at the time, but McStay was just one of the guys you watch and just go, his level was different to anybody else in the park. And there's been very few times I've been at Celtic Park, watched the team and went, that guy's head and shoulders above everybody. Like I remember years ago watching Paris Saint-Germain before they were just an oil team coming and played us in the Cup, Winners' Cup it was, right? And we went to Paris and got a wee bit of result. McStay was there at the time. We went down to Drew or could beat 1-0. So we all felt it was a wee chance, but they literally passed us off the park. It was one of the games you just got beat. I think it was 3-0, but it could have been any score. They were that good. And there's very few times you've seen a team like coming and doing that. Nowadays, no, it doesn't happen so much, but in his day, Paul was as good as anybody in his position in the country. And I say the country, I don't mean Scotland, I mean the UK at the time. Like, there's all these stories how you should have went to Lazio or Juventus and all that. See, this day, there's no way in this day and age many players would have stayed at Celtic like Paul McStay did. Like, everybody knows how much a Celtic fan Kieran Tierney is, right? A guy who if he wasn't playing football, would be standing in the North Curve, right? We just know that about the laddie. He's Celtic to the core, right? But when the time comes, the club would decide you're going because we're getting an offer of 20 odd million. And he says, I'm going to make 3 or 4 times my wages and I'm going down to the Premier League. It's the right time for some players to move, right? McStay had that opportunity dozens of times to leave Celtic and didn't. And that to me, is one of the first reasons why he's my favourite Celtic player of all time ahead of anybody, that he stuck with us, especially in an era where he's playing with guys running about him who wouldn't have got a game with faultless amateurs at the time. He's playing with guys who were coming for the army teams to play in that. Just utter rubbish players. And he stuck with us. But McStay in his early days was a dynamic number 8 that covered every bit of grass in the park. He was hard as nails. He made tackle. If you watch some of his early games, some of the tackles he made, he got up and won the ball and came out and then made a great passway. He could pick any pass in the world. In fact, the greatest pass of all time is his pass against them in the 2-0 game. And the MD that's listening to this can dispute that or the like. That is the best pass. It's called the pass for a reason. And on top of that, he was a great captain. I mean, he's kind of guy. He's just a leader on the park. He didn't go out shouting about it, like try to make an example in the park about how shouting the odds or telling players this or that. The reason he led by example, right? And he scored outrageous amounts of goals in his early career before he got injuries. He was a fabulous attacking midfield player and could make tackles for fun. But most people look at Paul McStay and the later years of his career where he was already crippled by injuries, like his ankles in bits. But because of the hammer throws of Scottish football being allowed to literally take, 3 and 4 times a game, somebody would make a tackle and get booked on next day, right? And he'd be getting folded in half with some shocking tackles. And most of the time, at that time, they'd get away with 2 or 3 before they got booked. So the ref, it was he should be wearing Kevlar, do you know what I mean, rather than shin guards, some of the tackles he made. But I could talk about Paul McStay for as long as you wanted to. But to me, he's my favourite Celtic player of all time. And that season, he was, if he did win Player of the Year, I think he might have done, he certainly was the best player in the country. And that was ahead of your soonest season of the world. And MDLC brought up night and day. He was head and shoulders above any in the country. You can switch into TPE now. Like Tommy Burns, the player, I seen the second half of his career as such. But before that, if you know anything about Celtic and you've read up on TPE how good he was, Tommy Burns was a fabulous player. But I talked about how players could look after themselves. That's one of the things that folk forget about Tommy Burns. Tommy Burns was hard as. He was a proper hard man in football. Clever way though, not like didn't run about trying to half guys in two, but he just every tackle he made, somebody he would make a mark on somebody. If somebody was running about kicking players, Tommy Burns would be one of the guys who would nail them. It wasn't like a wee Davy Hay, the kind of silent assassin who would nail guys, but he just had that bit of aura about him McStay. And obviously with the first player I can remember after him who looked a bit like it was John Collins. When they hit Evan that left foot, Evan goes on that left side, it just looks better, eh? You look at a player and you just think goes on that left foot and there's the balance and the kind of Evan looks so tidy on because you're left footed. He just had a great kind of look about him as a footballer, and if you watch it, I suppose Tommy Burns was lucky enough to play in some great Celtic teams, right, running through. But he had a great run at it as a manager. And actually, there's not a Celtic fan that I know would have thought he wouldn't have won a title, because if you look at it, the money they were throwing at that time, we were trying to keep up with them, and the football we played under Tom is the best football I've ever seen any Celtic team play. And if he'd had a decent goalkeeper and maybe anything like the same ability in the back line he had going forward from midfield forward, we could have coasted that title. But again, it's like classic thing, too many draws. It just killed us. But as a player, you can, if you ask any a slightly older generation than me, they tell you more about his first half of his career. But Tommy Burns is a fabulous player, fabulous. But the maestro is the maestro. He's the greatest Celtic player in my lifetime, and I include every big money buy they've had, include every guy who's went for 30 million like Dembele or Larsson or Sutton or Petrov, any of these guys. Lambert's that's won the Champions League. All these guys they're all great players in their own right, but in terms of what they mean to me as a Celtic supporter and what they done for Celtic, none of them could hold a candle at McStay.
Aye. I mean, that's some good insight there. And I mean, like even guys like Rio Ferdinand, I've heard him talk about Paul McStay, and like I'm sure Paul McStay, I don't know if he was at Man United or something, and Rio Ferdinand, Paul McStay came to the training, and Rio Ferdinand was like, "Is that Paul McStay?" And some of the foreign guys was like, "Who's Paul McStay?" And he's like, "Who's Paul McStay? Watch this guy. You need to go and watch this guy. What a player he was." And he's just talking about for when he was younger, mind like watching him and stuff. So he's well thought throughout the game. Certainly, I think for certainly British players, I don't know if he's as renowned across Europe, but I've heard a lot about McStay, and I enjoyed listening to you talking about him there.
There wouldn't be many players in that era in Scottish football, including Durrant before he got injured, or that would have walked out of Celtic into almost any team in football and been able to get a place. Do you know what I mean? When you're not talking about I'm going to wee teams for that. The teams that were looking at McStay were your Juventuses, Lazios, big teams down south. United were always looking at that. He would have went if he'd had the. You've got to remember he's lucky because he's a local boy. He's a family guy. He's got a big huge Celtic family. His wife's in the tradition. He's just one of the guys that I've met Paul McStay once, and I literally couldn't even speak. I was that nervous, and I met his brother. met Raymond a few times. He works in a similar industry to me in digital, and I met Raymond. I seen him sit at a conference one time. I went, didn't even, that's Paul McStay's, bro, because it's ripping out. I'm like, it's like, that's he's, and I was like, must be Raymond, because that's trying to put what age he'd be. It wasn't Wally, I knew that. But I met him one time, and I could hardly get a word out when I spoke to him. Just shook his hand and slavered basically for about 3 seconds. But I've seen that clip you're talking about, and it's actually, they're over it, because obviously, McStay, Paul moved to Australia, and he's got a successful business and that out there, but he moved to Australia, and Man United were on tour, doing like a pre-season tour out there.
Right,
and Ferdinand was actually, I remember, I've seen a clip, he was actually lying on the massage table, and the maestro had walked past a room, and he went, is that Paul McStay? Like, just looked like was slightly overweight, no looking like Paul McStay in his prime. And he literally jumped up to go, and we got photos of him and all that. It was like photos, and he was speaking to the guy, so as you say, the foreign players and that, who didn't know who he was. And he was like, blowing me, this guy beat in yous at football. He's miles ahead of any yous. You know what I mean? So, he maybe doesn't, you know what? It's one of the classic Scottish things. We don't give credit to our own players in that way. But Paul was just on a different level aimed at us at the time. And I just wish he'd been lucky enough to play a bit longer. If he played in a different era, it's like a lot of these guys, like imagine Jimmy Johnson playing now, the protection Messi gets, right? Jimmy Johnson would beat 3 guys, go back and beat them again just for a laugh, right? I mean, just because he could, but they would be kicking lumps at him while they'd done it. I mean, imagine the difference in protection now for a Messi of the world versus a Jimmy Johnson playing the position. So it's all different eras, but Paul was just, as I say, he's my hero with Celtic. And if I could ever watch one player again in the prime coming to Celtic and play, it'd be him.
I would have to agree with that. I would love to have seen him in his prime. I've seen him, as I say, in the latter stage of his career, but I certainly would have enjoyed that. But so sort of moving on. So following on for that Hearts draw, we maintained the unbeaten run with a draw at home to Aberdeen, and wins away to Falkirk and Dundee United, which set us up nicely for the New Year derby. A win here, by all accounts, would have sent us 7 points clear of them, albeit they'd have a game in hand, and a win we got. What was your memories of this one, and talk us through the chant for the stands, given that this was the first game our birthday year, and we were schooling our bitter rivals 2-0 at our home ground.
It was one of the ones that, it's a game that you'll never forget. Do you know what I mean? It's one of the kind of classic games that against them that you've played them that many times in your lifetime. There's games you forget about. You know, it was a game that either one team won. I remember I seen one of them on Sky recently, where a game is like a classic Celtic Rangers game come up, and we could beat 4-2. And I was like, I'll bet Berkovic scores 2 goals in this game, if I remember, and he did, right? But I can't remember any of the team, any name that scored. It was instantly forgettable. But that game wasn't, because that game was it was bonkers. That was the game that ended up in court. I think it was the first time ever a football match had ended up in court. We ended up picking up a draw, but I think they had 2 or 3 sent off maybe. We had, obviously, McAvenny got sent off. And it was, well, McAvenny tells a great story about it, and I'll get to that, I suppose. But they had Graham Roberts at the time in goals at the end of the game, right? Because Chris Woods got sent off, so he did goalie's jersey on, standing, and they were obviously singing some of the not very politically correct songs, and he was conducting them and all that. He's standing waving his finger like a conductor at them. I can remember that. And then Peter the Pointer tried his best to cause mayhem as well by blessing himself when he's after the second goal. It was just, the game was bedlam. It was just bedlam. It was like mental from end to end, and it was like, I suppose it was one of the games where you got away with the result. Do you know what I mean? It was like, I think we were up in the game 1-0 or 2-0, and it was one of the games that just all went mental. But there was, looking at it now, going back, I can remember, like, you don't see so much now. You'll see the odd thing about the number of assaults or the kind of issues in the streets after these games, and it happens all, by the way, happens across the entire central belt of Scotland. You know, it's like after the games, no matter who wins, there's always going to be bothering a town or a village. But there was, I can remember there being like mega bother after that game. It was horrible, and that's one of the matches that I can remember trying to convince my dad to take me to one of the Celtic Rangers games that year. And after that game, he's like, "Jink, I'm going to take you to that. Look at that. Look at the mayhem that's caused in the city. Run about it. Look at on the park. the way the players are behaving, and look at the atmosphere. That's no something. I was going on the bus by that point, right? So I was getting on what was the Celtic and Shorts bus at the time. It was a big old bus that, but I used to stop at the commercial on the station. But I used to go on that bus, and I was getting to games myself then. We actually started going with Peter Nielsen for my year, and sometimes Big Chris Thomas my year. Actually, we met like say Barry Brogan, Kev Carr, guys who went to other schools. We ended up at St Kent's through the football. We'd started going the last year of school and bumped into these guys. So it's interesting. My dad was like, no chance, just no way you're getting to that yourself. So that kind of, as much as it was like a good point in the end, Celtic should have won the game. You know what I mean? And they ended up, I think if I remember rightly, they nicked a point at the end of the game. It was like a poxy goal, when they kind of probably a Stramash or like a header or something. It was one of the games, I can't remember who scored it, but it was like a totally deflated at full time. One of the games you think, just threw away this. We should have won this game as well. But as I say, the game ended up in court, so that tells you how much fun the game was.
Aye. I think, but I don't know if I've got my notes wrong then, because I've actually got Celtic won the game 2-0, but maybe I've read up wrong. God knows.
Well, I think we're talking the 2-2 draw. I think it's me that's getting mixed up.
Well, I'm talking about it was the New Year derby. Well, according to my notes, they won 2-0, and then it was obviously the fans were singing "Happy Birthday, dear Celtic."
Aye, you're right. So Stephen can cut this bit out. Absolutely. So I'm ahead myself. I'm thinking we're on the after New Year here. I'm forgetting we played them at New Year as well in their day. So you're right. So I'm totally ahead of myself. Like going, right, I'm thinking it's a 2-0 game. You're talking about that.
No. I wasn't wanting to cut you off there because I wasn't sure if I'd got my notes wrong.
Well, you're right, because we definitely beat them. That's for sure.
Aye.
And it was one of them. I'm getting well confused ahead of myself there. So going back to it, it would be, what date was that? The 2nd of January. 2nd of January. Aye, it's the kind of nerd day game. That's right. So we'll take that from the top again, right? So we can get in, especially talking about Happy Birthday Celtic, because that was the first game we played after the turn of the year. So so take it back to that. It would have been obviously the very first game after the turn of the year. So the big thing was that there was the whole jungle and the Celtic end were singing "Happy Birthday" to Celtic at full time, right? Which was quite. It was one of the things that we tear in the glass eye. That actually it was a huge result for Celtic, because we'd ended up going off and beating them in the first game we played them, and at home, and it made a big massive impact to pick up that game after New Year, because they really needed to beat us that much. It gave us a decent lead in the title chase. And actually, there are a few things I can remember that game. Obviously, one of the first things is and it obviously is horrendous to think about now, is the way, and it's don't know, it's nowhere near as bad or as many people involved in it as it's made out, but there was, given it's the time, it was like 87, 88, there was horrendous stuff happening with Mark Walters. That's one thing I should mention. There was bananas getting chucked at him in that time. It's just totally unacceptable stuff. That actually, I look at the Celtic support now, and that's just something I would never expect to see for us, right? You look at the way we, and that's open to all stuff, not as everything, unless you're of certain persuasions. But for our fans to do that was something I just never expected to see. And actually, considering the first black player to play up here was a Celtic player, so that was horrible. But the result was massive. And actually, what I can mind was, in terms of the game itself, it took a back seat the next days in the papers. It was like 2 or 3 days. They all been on about this, the bananas getting chucked on the park and all that kind of stuff. Now it's just horrendous. So that kind of took the wind out of sails a bit, because it was a great result for us in terms of the title chase. But there was no celebrations in the papers the next few days, and actually it was one of the things that didn't sit very well for us. You know what I mean? But again, as I mentioned them early on, the signing of McAvenny made all the difference. We'd a really what I'd have called a kind of a strong, probably if not our strongest, one of our strongest teams out that game, and obviously having signed McAvenny and Joe Miller, they both were involved in that game heavily. But McAvenny scored the 2 goals, and it was one of the classic things that happen in a derby. He scored. I remember him scoring right before half time. It was like because this is the game I got to. This is the one game I got that season that I was allowed to go to. And he scored late on the first half, if not the last kick of the ball, almost right at half time. And that gave us that kind of, you go in at half time with a lead. And then we scored again late on. Wasn't like not right at the end of the game, maybe like 75 minutes or 80 minutes or something. We scored the second goal and just to see it out. But Rangers had the full team out again. They had the proper strongest team out, and we beat them again. And it kind of then I felt after that this is there for us to win now. We've got to, after Christmas and New Year, we'll beat them in that game. We went away thinking, right, this is on. The Centenary title is now on for sure. If we can keep that kind of pace up.
Aye. I think McAvenny, his quote, I don't know if it was right after the game or if it's been since. He had a quote. I'm going to read it out just because it makes for quite good reading. He says, when I put the second one in, the whole stadium erupted and the crowd began singing "Happy Birthday, Dear Celtic." Anyone who didn't know it was a special year, they would know then. It was all as if it was meant. And that sort of gives you shivers, that wee quote.
Yes, aye.
It takes you there.
Aye.
Sorry.
It does. Here's the arms are standing up. Thinking about it now, mate. Actually, it's taking me right back to it, because that whole thing about your Centenary season, to go and win it, considering that the money they were throwing at it and trying to get back in, and I think that was probably the season before Murray came in, but certainly Souness was there, and they were going at it hell for leather. For us to come out of that, and a big, it's your birthday year, and go and win your 100th Centenary season, to go and beat them in that game. They sung it for ages. You don't get it now. Like, the bits of the stadium will sing a song for a wee bit of time, and even for all their faults, people think the Green Brigade, what they've brought back to the stadium in terms of the atmosphere and singing is really needed, because too many folk now be sitting down, didn't want to sing. But back then, Jungle Celtic End, you would be literally 90 minutes of singing. They'd just be singing constantly. You would go home and could speak after it. And in that situation, that particular game, I can remember the Celtic fans sung that for ages after it. Right, for ages after they started singing "Happy Birthday." It was a special moment to be a Celtic supporter, for sure.
Aye, that's one of the times I would have loved to have been in the stands, just to experience that. But I mean, that's the turn of the year, and at this point, after that win, we embarked on part 2 of the successful mission, and we began our Scottish Cup campaign with a home tie against Stranraer. Were Stranraer shit hot back then, because it was only 1-0 at home?
No, not by any stretch of imagination. That's a classic early Scottish Cup tie. You get it was at home as well. It wasn't even like we're away. You get one of these when they have to put TV cameras up on stuff and build scaffolds up to the game, like up at Brecon with a hedge. But you end up in that situation. It's one of the classic. You win the game, right? You get the result and you move on. It was one of the ones that it's like I think it was the third or fourth round it'd be the Scottish Cup, and it was like a typical, you either win that game 8 or 9, or you win it 1-0 and get through. And it was it was not a classic by any stretch of imagination, but I can remember that game. That's one of the ones that I've put to bed. I couldn't even tell you who scored the goal in that game, if I remember right.
I don't know, but I mean, it's one of the ones you want to win the tie regardless. It's a cup game. It's knockout football. You win 1-0, you're in the next round, basically. But so then back to the league, we won the next 5 in the league, meaning that we had a trip to Ibrox and Pittodrie with a home game against Dundee United sandwiched in between. If we come through unscathed, the title's all but won. The excitement among the support must be fever pitch by now. Sort of describe the emotion before heading into these massive games. Well, certainly the Rangers and Aberdeen ones, as they were both in and around us in the title race at that time.
Aye, and that is one of the ones, you look at the fixtures, sometimes they come up and you go, that's like a classic situation where you play the teams in and around about you back to back or close, and usually with Celtic that always falls. You've got like a away European game with somebody just as you come back to play them at Ibrox, and you played the Sunday before at Pittodrie or whatever, right? It's one of the ones where you've got like a series of games that you know are vital. And I can remember it was the game against them. Was that the draw? Is that a 2-each game you're talking about? I'm trying to remember what was what.
I think they won 2-1, but I could say my
I'm trying to remember what was what. So it was. I'm trying to remember now. So I think the draw was the last game. Actually, that was maybe the last game because it was gone for them probably. And so I'm trying to think now back to when that would. So we played them, and we had a game. It was either Aberdeen. United? Was it United? You said.
Aye.
So it was one of these situations where we kind of steadied the ship after a wee second shaky spell in the round after we beat Rangers at New Year. So we shaky bit again, and then they were on a good run. It's just in terms of dropping a couple of daft points. We were on a good run again, and they ended up coming up. It was like that situation where you're going Ibrox, Pittodrie, and then you come back to home, and if you can get points in the games, you feel like it's there. And then obviously you've won the first game against Rangers. We beat them. It was 2 or 3-1, I think, at home. And then we went up to Aberdeen and beat them. And it was once you went to Pittodrie, it's one of the games you think we beat them, and then you got and beat them at Pittodrie. It's like that's it. You surely we can't lose it for here. Even we can't throw that away. And I think at that point we're all thinking that's it. It's done and dusted.
Aye. And then I mean, so they've came through the sort of Rangers and Aberdeen games unscathed. The title. It's all but secured. I mean, probably the managers and the players at the time wouldn't say that as they always do, but I think most of the fans are feeling like we're almost there. But we moved back to the cup, and we've already disposed of Hibs, courtesy a replay at Easter Road and Partick Thistle, respectively, setting up a Hampden date with Hearts. And what a dramatic match this served up. 1-2 at the tail end of that season, as we'll inevitably touch on. But did you get along to this semi-final?
I was at that game. That's one of the only cup games I was at that season. I was at the game at Easter Road, the replay. So I was at that. My dad, he took me that, right. And I got to the next game. It's funny you mentioned that because if you think about that now, if you look at the draw for the Scottish Cup, right, how often would you get in a season Hibs, Hearts, and Dundee United? And it's got all Premier League in a row like that. Yeah, to be honest with you, looking at the draws now, that just doesn't happen now. It just doesn't happen. I don't know why, but we certainly had a tough draw that year, and I'm pretty sure, if I remember rightly, we were pretty stinking against Hibs in the first game, and we ended up getting the draw and went to Easter Road. I wasn't at the home game, but was at the away game with my dad at Easter Road, and then we came back and I got tickets to the semi-final, and we actually bought them for, I can't remember if I got them on the bus or we actually went and bought tickets somewhere. I think my mum might have went and got tickets for me for something like that. It's a weird one, but we went to that game, and it was like one of the kind of games. It was a bit end to end, a bit open as such, and both teams kind of try to go and win it. Hearts were still a good team at the time, they were no mugs by any stretch, and they went ahead actually in the game. They went ahead, and it was like, I'm sure, I'm trying to remember who done it, but pretty sure there was a foul on the keeper. It's like I would agree with that. Nowadays it would have been like the boy would get booked for it probably, but pretty much, remember rightly, it was a foul on a goalie, and they went up, and it just was like Celtic constantly. One of these situations where you're going, the goal's got to come, and it's like kept going, and just couldn't. Even we had good chances, they just weren't taking them, and we got that classic. I mean, you get in a great position, the final ball's crap, or they didn't play the right pass at the right time, or when they did come in the box, it was a rubbish finish, and it gets to that stage later on in the game, you're thinking, nah, it's not to be, or we're going to lose this game. It's one of the, just like Abdi says, one of the days. But it was the way it transpired. Obviously, wasn't to be that way. It wasn't. We ended up with the, I suppose it's the Centenary thing, isn't it? It's like Celtic in their Centenary season. It was just meant to be that they they went on and got the result in that game, you know. And I'm sure, like I said, going back to the season '86, back to Love Street, you know, that the Hearts bottle thing again, you know. Celtic got the first goal, and I can't remember what minute we scored. It was late on anyway. We got the first, and then
it was about 87 minutes or something like that. It might be wrong there, but
you're maybe not wrong. Put it this way, this is back in the day where you didn't get 7 or 8 minutes injury time. Do you know what I mean? You maybe get 1 or 2 or max. So it was like, if something proper happened, the guy went off on a stretcher. You wouldn't get like 30 seconds added for a goal being scored and that kind of stuff. So when we scored, it was late on. It was like, you did one of the games, you're just saying, just get a draw and get a replay, and then they nicked the goal, and then obviously it's bedlam after that, utter bedlam. Because I think it's one of the games that you felt like, because you look at it and go, if you score 1 in a lot of the games, you'll get 2. But it was so late on, right? It was like right at the last kick of the ball where you felt like you scored the goal to get a draw, and then to go and obviously go on and nick that winner. I mean, it was, I think it was like, it was 90 minutes anyway, let's say, right? It was probably 90 minutes anyway when they got the goal. And they had, like, Hearts had made great chances, right? But McAvenny's goal, if I remember it, he scored the first goal, and it wasn't a great goal, I don't think, the first goal, but it was the second goal that won it for us. It was just like, it was utter bedlam at full time, and it's one of the games that kind of knocked the radio out, and the cameras and the telly was jumping about daft. It was just like, it was craziness. And I remember going back home, and like, you're obviously buzzing because you've won the game. You're getting back home and getting out. You know, it's like getting out of Hampden down the south side. It's always a nightmare, right? Coming like that side out of Glasgow's always torture. If Hampden is in Mount Florida, but you weren't bothered because you didn't care about how long it took you to go home because you'd won that game 2-1. And I can remember getting like desperately like back because we had in the house. I'm sure we had like a Betamax video at the time, and it was like the game was on the telly, I think. So it was like you wanted it to be recorded, but try to set a recorder then would have been like, you know, a degree and some kind of special rocket science to set a video to record. You're basically you were hoping your gran would hit play and record at the same time and get that game on tape. And I remember that, like, either the highlights of the game or the game itself. I remember watching it dozens of times after it, because it was not like now you just go to YouTube and look at the goals and that. But I remember watching it. It was like after Larchford or something, I was doing the commentary on Scott Sport and actually seeing it again and again, watching the celebrations. It was brilliant. One of the in my early days watching Celtic, because if you think about it, after that season, I went through the entire high school years of going to watch Celtic home and away and doing nothing. So that was like thinking back to when I was in my younger days watching us. That was one of the best moments to be a Celtic fan. It's just the way we won the game. It's like, I don't know if you're at the game. You were going to football at the time for sure at the time, but if you remember back to the game against Shakhtar Donetsk in the Champions League qualifiers, was it Champions League? It was the Spartak Moscow game, because the Shakhtar game was in a group stage, but we beat Spartak Moscow in penalties. Remember? No, who was it? No, I'm getting mixed up. That was penalties when Boric saved the penalty. Who was the team beat James Forrest scored a goal right now?
Oh, Shakhtar Karagandhi it was.
Karamandy, I was saying Shakhtar Donetsk. That's because I remember that when big Yuri Arashek scored a late goal against them. Then remember Donati scored a goal in 90 odd minutes against them, right, for it to go put us through basically. But that game against that Karagandhi, who were like Johnny No-Namers, you'd have thought, right? But we needed a result at home because we didn't do well over there. And Jamesy scored like 90 odd minutes to win the game. And it's one of the times I can remember, like, as an adult, going absolutely mental at a result, going like as if he beat Juventus or Man United or something. It was crazy. And that game's like that. Like, I remember going to my grand's back garden, and like every time I was like kicking the ball for the fence, it was like McAvenny scoring on that. It was that kind of thing. So that's one of the memories that live right through to the day. Fabulous.
It's similar to when Celtic, they were down a game I've touched on before in the podcast, when Celtic were down 1-0 to Dundee United at Parkhead, and it was in the Scottish Cup, and they scored 2 late goals, Andy Tom and I think it was Van Hooijdonk, and that was similar sort of the way they won that game, and that was bedlam in the stands then as well. So we've come through. the semi-final. We've got the final against Dundee United to look forward to. And we're just looking to sort of tie up title glory. It's getting very close, and we've had 2-0 victories over Hibs and St Mirren. And despite losing 2-1 at Tynecastle, it sets us up to be able to clinch the league title at home to Dundee United with 2 games to spare. And Rangers didn't even finish second, which I found pretty funny.
That was unusual at the time. If you look back at kind of 10 seasons previous, there's plenty of times they finished out with the top 3 or 4. So it wasn't unusual. Going forward now, you'd expect it always be Glasgow 1 and 2, but back then, that's the thing you got to remember. The spell they went through in the late 70s and 80s, there was low teens going to games at Ibrox, low teens and thousands. So they weren't, all this about how they stuck with them through the journey and all that stuff, utter rubbish. If you ask a Rangers fan who was going to games in 70s, 80s, they tell you how empty that place was then. And it's interesting to remember that, because a lot of folk will forget it quite quickly. About it was always a full house and that, wasn't it? So they were out with the top 3 and 4 quite often, because you had a really strong Aberdeen who beat us plenty of times to the title. You had Dundee United who won it. You had Hearts who should have won it. So they were some good teams, and Rangers quite often weren't in the top 2. So you're right. It's funny to think about it now, but that year with the money they were spending, you would have thought they must have got top 2. Surely, eh? I can't remember who finished second actually, because I would have thought they finished second. But you're right. You didn't.
I think it was Aberdeen, but could be wrong. The Rangers definitely didn't finish second, but I mean, going into so they can clinch the title against Dundee. What was your sort of memories of this one, and how was it celebrated afterwards, as regards like family and stuff, and the overriding emotions of getting it over the line in such a momentous year for the club?
Oh, it was one of the ones that, if you remember, what year would it be? The season we stopped at 10, right? There was a game we went up to Dunfermline, we could have won it and won the league up there, right? And Celtic drew 1 each, just lost a goal. A boy called Craig Faulkner, I think the guy's name was.
Faulkner, it was.
Like a big fluky header with a few minutes to go, right? And it was like, took the wind right out of ourselves. And I can remember, because I didn't want that game to go down to the last game of the season, because there's so much in it, there's so much it meant so much to everybody, right? But that season, we ended up with a couple of kind of games before we played Dundee, and we had a couple of games that were like kind of standard 2 or 3-0 games. We beat, I'm sure we had, so I can't remember who else we beat, but we had a couple of games before it where you won no bother, and then we lost a game at Hearts at Tynecastle, right? And that was like, oh no way. I mean, there's surely no, and it can't even fall apart now. There's a big gap, but you always worry, and it meant we had the game against Dundee at home, and it was honestly, I know the classic Celtic reporting the numbers of fans during the 80s and 90s was outrageous. I remember going to games when you could not move in the jungle of Celtic end, and it would say the official attendance is 28,500, right? You'd be like going back in one stand, right? He's getting cash at the till, and don't get me wrong, I was getting chucked over the gate as a laddie still sometimes, but there were plenty of that, but the numbers were no that. I reckon there's probably not a Celtic fan who was going to games then wouldn't tell you were at that game, because it was unbelievable how many people were in the city. Given you're only a matter of, I think if I remember rightly, Hillsborough was the next year, or the year, maybe the next year Hillsborough, right? You'd already had some horrible incidents at Bradford, with fires, loads of issues with crushing at games. I remember that. I didn't go to that game, right? Because my dad had said it's going to be mental in terms of how busy it'll be, and I'm not letting you go into yourself. And I remember almost crying about it, saying, just you take me then, you go with me. And he was never any at my dad, right? And I think he knew the league was won, so why take you to the game? Because I'm thinking that's why I want to go. But I remember him saying, look, you'll get plenty of these chances. I'm not taking you that game, you're not going yourself. And it's one of the ones I remember looking at it on the telly, and it's like, I'm pretty sure Big Andy took the 2 Greenhorn laddies. I think they both got taken to the game. But there was loads of people who were like, they'll not get in, because there was like, a limited amount of people going to get tickets, and then to pay the gate. And it just if you looked at it on the telly, you'll see it. I mean, back then you had the wee kind of blue disabled cars running about the ground and all that, and there was a track. It was like There was people spilling over the walls. It was people up the sides of the pylons. It was mental. There must have been like, I'm not saying it was a record attendance because there was more opportunity for standing the games when the main stand is standing and stuff, but it was outrageously busy. And I can remember that game, like, it was one of the ones where you just wanted to get over the line, right? And I remember, like, again, he like getting back home, you're kicking the ball about the back garden, and you're in the street and playing with your pals, playing football and that after it. And you've got your, at that point, I can remember it's funny because I was at Celtic Park a few weeks ago getting the kids the new strips and getting like all three of them the new tops and that. And it was the 2 or 3 days before the new home kit came out. So the away kit and the third kit were out. And I took Remy looking lay up to the ground myself. Barry wasn't there. And I bought the 2 new away kits, but I couldn't get the home kit. So I was like, raging, didn't come out till Thursday or something. But in the superstore, they had the Centenary top and the away Centenary top in kid sizes, right? And I was as soon as I seen them, I'm buying the Wednesday anyway. But they were also on like a sale, like 12 quid a top or something. And I can remember getting them, and it threw me like instantly right back to that time, because I remember wearing the yellow away top. It was the very first time I had a full strip. I'd had Celtic tops before, but never a full strip. I remember because I got it at Christmas that year. I remember Mum and Dad being raging because I got up, me and Neil got up early, went down the stairs and never woke them up. And I think they'd only went to bed about 4 o'clock and tried to wake them up, never got up. And I came running upstairs with my Celtic strip on, jumping out the bed, and my dad was in the huff of me because Santa had been there and they seen me. So that strip, like that, you know, you get sermons that throw you back to that time. I remember being out playing in Langwig Avenue and Park View as a kid then, with that strip on, that yellow top with the green shorts and that. And like you're running about shouting McStay and that as you're passing the ball about the streets. But that time was just like, you just felt like it was going to be every year after that as a laddie. You just thought, you know, we've won it, the title's in the bag, we've got a Scottish Cup to look forward to, and it was just like, as a kid, you just thought that this is how it is being a Celtic fan, because we'd obviously won plenty when I was young. I didn't win it every year or even every second year, but you'd won plenty, so you weren't expecting to go into a period of title and trophy drought for so long after it. But I could just remember it being like, I can remember like my Uncle Joe coming back for the game. It wasn't even like drunk or that night. He came back and he was like crying and that about winning it, and this like celebrations in the street and stuff. It was like people were out singing and dancing in the street stuff, even like, but maybe not as much as when we stopped to 10, but it was a bit like that in terms of the result, because it was such a big season for Celtic in terms of centenary year.
It was absolutely huge. And I'm sure, just when you were talking about the amount of fans it was there, I'm sure I read that Andy Walker described it. He said it was like one of the best games he's ever like been a party played in, and he said that you just looked up to the stands and it was just a Venetian green and white, and I thought that was a really good descriptive, and although I can't remember it, it sort of took you there to an extent. But I
described that spot on, isn't he? It's just in terms of the way it fell and the way that it worked out. It's like it just was like a mass moving. You know, you look at the games back in the 60s and 70s, and you look at the amount of people on the grounds. Like a classic one's the Celtic Leeds game at Hampden, right? And you look at the number of folk there, and like when one person moves, 100 people move. It was a bit like that, but it spilled over onto the track and everything. It was like so many people out on the track side and sitting over the wall, and kids sitting down on the ground and like lying down in front of the track side wall. It was kind of crazy. And actually, like I say, not obviously nowadays you'd never get away with it, but it would just make it. I suppose it was the safest thing to do was let folk go out on the track so they want to go be crushed. But it was that's like I remember looking at it and just thinking I'd love to have been at that, but no, I'll blame Tommy G for that one. Not let me get to it.
I'll have a word with him the next time I see him.
Do that, please.
But so that says we've clinched the title in a momentous year, the centenary year, and we're going into the showpiece event of the season, and with a massive opportunity to complete a famous double in our 100th year of existence. Sort of an uneventful, goalless first half by all accounts, but the second half is sparked into life early with a Kevin Gallagher goal. Were you worried as that goal goes in, or had you seen enough in the game to think would still do it?
It's one of the ones that I remember watching that game on TV. That being the semi-final, we couldn't get tickets to the final, and I watched it in my grand's in 32 Lang Avenue, and sat in there with Celtic strip on, Centenary top, because every kid in our class at school, when you get now, every kid I'm sure in that class at school had that Celtic top with the granddad collar on it, right? So I can remember apart from our communion photos, I can remember that more than anything else about that year in school. And I can remember the game. It's like we obviously been the best team in the country, but United were a good side still. They were decent, and I think it was one of the ones when they scored, the ball went through, and like Gallagher as a youngster was absolutely rapid. And you see it in that game. You watch your YouTube highlights that game, because actually I looked at the goals to just remind myself when they scored them. Like I remember, I know we scored late, right? But I looked to see what minute they scored their goal. I was like, how early did they score? But when he goes through, he just it's as if he's, the rest of the guys that are defending are like towing a caravan, and he just runs away from them and then like smashes it right in the top bag, like no chance for the keeper. And at that point, you're just thinking like United had a good side, and one of the things that were built on was being pretty dour at the back. You know, they'd like some Malpass and at the back still who were like they could see games out. You know what I mean? So it was a wee worry for me at the time, like watching the TV, going, "Oh no, are we going to score here?" Because Celtic were the better side, but we weren't making great chances. I remember, and it was just like the game was just going on and on and on. And you'd obviously had a number of games that season. There was tons of games where we won them late on. Like I don't know if there's ever been a season ever since then where Celtic have turned games around so late on so often. It was like it was almost like they'll do it, and it was just we'll get the result, and then we scored the. I remember going outside. I was totally like panicking as a youngster. I'll be like 10, 11. I was sitting there watching the game, and it was 1-0, 1-0, 1-0, and I was like, I had a ball in the house to me, sitting in the ball, and I was like bouncing it out of pure nerves and getting told to take the ball outside and that type of stuff. And I'm saying that politely. I think it was actually my granda who said it to me, get the ball outside, but not very politely, being an ex-miner. But I remember taking the ball outside and coming back in, and we scored as I walked back in the living room. Back at like these wee tiny, 2 round council houses. Walked back in the living room, and the ball, Mackie Ben just stuck the first one in, and jump about crazy, and like punching my grand's. Should a wee chandelier kind of light? These wasn't crystal for sure, but wee chandelier thing, jumping about and actually like hitting it, jumping up the couch and everything. And it was just like bedlam. We scored the equaliser in the living room, about 5 was in it, and on a 20-inch telly or something, maybe weirder than that. But it just, as soon as we scored the goal, you knew you were going to win it, because you don't get feelings like that very often. It just was like, we've scored this and it's going to be done. We're going to win, and lo and behold, obviously, wee Macca doesn't let us down, and that was it. It was in the stars, like you said earlier on. It was our year, and I think if you look at it, you look at the way they celebrated the end, the way like McNeil coming out on the park, and with TB, like his words about how they're always there, that type of stuff. It just, I'm getting goosebumps now thinking about the emotion of the moments as a youngster, and when I see them back as I've been an older Celtic fan. That's great days. That was one of the days where you just, as a Celtic supporter, if you've been 10 or 40, there's probably not many better days than win a Scottish Cup final. You score 2 goals in the last few minutes to win it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Aye, and by the way, I sort of, when I was doing my sort of notes for it, I read that it was basically a carbon copy of the '85 final, which was against the same team. And it almost went the same way. Dundee United were up 1-0, and then Celtic turned it around pretty late on as well. So they've made a habit of that.
That's funny because you mentioned that. I hadn't seen that game, the '85 final. I hadn't watched it, but I've seen it since then. I've watched the highlights of it on YouTube and all that type of stuff. And I remember that now looking back at it, saying they must have been raging about that. Like within a couple of Scottish Cup finals, where they looked like they've won it, and then we came back and snatched it. And actually in that game, if you think about it, like United, once they were up 1-0, United had a couple of good chances to win the game. They had that kind of classic where you go 1 up and then you miss a chance. And if they'd probably scored that second goal, it'd have been super likely would have won the game in 90 minutes. Might have took it to extra time, whatever, but certainly wouldn't have won it in 90 minutes. So when I say Maka scored that goal, it was if I remember rightly, it was kind of all Celtic the last 10, 15 minutes, and then he just, you've seen the goal a million times, I'm sure. When he turns it in, it's just like, it's just written in stars for us. It was fabulous.
Even his celebration as he runs away, it's like he can't believe, like, he probably feels when the ball comes and he's got to score, but when he runs away, you can see the disbelief in his face. Like, has this actually happened? Have we turned this around? Sort of thing, eh?
Aye, and I'm looking now. I've just googled their team to see who their team was, right? To try and think about who was all on that team, right? And I'm looking around just to name some of the Dundee United players, right? So Thompson's in goals. They had Bowman, Hegarty, Dave Derry, Malpass, McKinley, Jim McInally, Eamon Bannon, Kevin Gallagher, Mixu Patlinen, Ian Ferguson, and Paul Sturrock and John Clark were the subs. So that's a strong as any United team. You can see why it was like that's a proper team they were. They're not a ham and egg side. They were a proper team. So when they went one up and missed their chances, if they'd nicked a second goal, it might have been a different outcome. But the fact is, they never. And then it's all, McAvenny will live off his entire. He'll never need to buy a pint again in the Celtic pub for the goals, I'd imagine.
No, absolutely not. Aye, so, I mean, it's just sort of to finish off. Then, I mean, it's the perfect season. They couldn't have made it up really, but overall, it's another roller coaster of a season. But fair to say, an unexpected and timely double for the Hoops, and like we've said, it was written in the stars. Just a couple of wee stats on the season, just to round up. Andy Walker was the top goal scorer in that year, which you'd sort of touched upon. And again, you were right with the Paul McStay shout of the PFA Player of the Year. I mean, sorry.
I'm not surprised at that. I wasn't sure if he'd won Player of the Year, but it'd have been an absolute injustice if he hadn't. You know what I mean?
Aye, definitely. I mean, but it was ultimately they won a double as a squad in a monumental year in our long, great and unbroken history. We embarked on a barren spell for 7 years after that, as we all know, and we came out the other side better for it. But in the end, Celtic will always have the centenary season, and the fans will always have the centenary season. Celtic will always give you special moments and memories, and this was just another to add to the long list. Would you agree?
That's it, mate. And as I said, just in terms of that, the overriding thing about the end of that season, and you've probably seen the clip a million times when he starts welling up when he's saying it with TB, but when he says they're there and they're always there, and God bless every one of them, right? I'm thinking about that, even saying the words out loud, how much it meant to us all, and how much it meant to him, and other guys in that park who are utterly steeped in Celtic. For mixed days and the Peter Grants of the world, being injured in games and playing through anything for Celtic. That season, for McNeil to come back the way he did, for him to make those signings that knew what it was about, and guys like Billy Stark who came in and made a massive impact against the kind of evil empire of what was happening across the roadway, throwing money at something, for the first time really. It was like it wasn't even happening down south really then. There was no clubs yet. It wasn't. You look at it now, we play teams like City and so on, and have been bought over with crazy money getting spent. That wasn't happening in British football, really. You just had clubs that had the kind of money they owned. So for them to be doing that and outspending such a level, it was an imbalance in the force, let's say. And that year, it definitely went against. Most betting people at the start of the season would have bet Rangers to win the league, and certainly for us to win a double in a year, it's a season I'll never forget.
Aye. Well, I mean, that sort of brings us to the end of the episode. It's been a long one tonight, but I've thoroughly enjoyed it. What about yourself? You enjoyed it?
Great, mate. I could talk about this season and any season for as long as you want. And actually, I'm sure that the guys will be able to edit down some of the stories to a more listenable level. But see, I've really enjoyed all the episodes that you guys do as part of Standard Show, and There's so many opportunities for this type of stuff with people who have got a lot more detail and can bring more colour to some of these games than I can in some of these seasons. But I'm really looking forward to more of these rewind seasons and sitting with a beer and listening to them when I get a chance, as much as I can.
Aye, I mean this is only our second rewind. We need to really get a few more on the go, but just with the actual main podcast and commitments everybody's got, it's just not always possible. But I mean,
time for it, isn't it? That's the thing. It's an international week's a great opportunity to talk about Celtic, because let's be honest,
aye, it keeps it going.
It's not football when it's not Celtic, frankly. So,
aye, exactly. But again, thanks very much for coming on and giving up your time for us. It's very much appreciated, Dave.
Welcome, mate. And I look forward to listening to the next few episodes as we kick on this season, and hopefully can get behind Ange and decide. And let's hope some of the new guys that came in can hit the ground running. But Landy Walker, the guy for Holland's a great example. You know what I mean? If he can get a goal or two early on, that could make a big difference there as this year. Because we need more goals in that team who we've lost.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more with that. But I mean, just to round up, thanks again to everyone who listens and has subscribed to us. And on this podcast, feel free to add some comments and memories of your own this season. I'd love to hear some of the stories out with Dave's. So I go for that. We're always happy to hear other comments and interact with you guys. But again, until next time, everyone, take care and hail, hail.